Okay, so now bishop to g5 by Tal, pinning the knight, and this setup is known as Queen's Gambit Declined modern variation. Okay, so now Nikolai develops his dark square bishop on e7, breaking the pin, and you can see what he is preparing for. And after that, okay, so after that, queen to c2 by Tal, which indicates that he wants to castle queen side, so that he can launch a massive attack on the white king. And after that, here Nikolai strikes in the center with c5. And now he is challenging the d4 and c4 pawns, and for now, it's better for white to either capture the pawn on c5 or maybe the pawn on d5. But as we all know, Tal is not the kind of player who plays simple games, and he showed this by castling queenside. And now he is ready to push the h pawn. And finally, Tal launches an attack on the king's side, queen to c7 by black, preparing for queen to f4 check. So that's why Tal slides his king to b1. And after that, queen to f4. Here basically Nikolai brings his queen into an active square. Knight to e2, Tal attacks the queen, but queen to e4, asking for queen exchange, which Tal accepts and he captures on e4. D takes e4, and since this knight is attacked, so that's why knight to d2 by Tal. And after that, Tal advances his knight further into the black territory, so that's why rook to d8, directly attacking that powerful knight. And Tal defends it with c5, placing this knight permanently on this d6 square. Okay, so now Nikolai plays b6, attacking the defender of the knight, but rook to c1. Tal brings his rook into the c file, and after that he takes on c5, but knight to b7, attacking the rook. So that's why rook to d7, he directly attacks the knight, but knight takes c5. Tal gobbles the pawn, attacking the rook again. So that's why rook to e7. And after that, knight to a6. And now look at these pawns. He is preparing to push b4 and a4 to expand on the queen side. Here, Nikolai plays g5. He directly attacks the h4 pawn, but takes, and finally Tal played b4, expanding on the queen side. And after seeing this, Nikolai also expand on the king side by pushing f5. Okay, so now rook to d8 by Nikolai, and you can see e4 is coming. So to stop this, Tal brings his knight back on c5, eyeing the e4 square, and also this knight can jump to b3 at any time so that he can exchange this active knight on d4. Okay, so now rook to c8, and basically he's preparing to swing the other rook to c7 to put massive pressure on the c5 knight. So to stop this, Tal brings his knight back to b3, asking for rook exchange. But rook takes c1 check, king takes c1, and after that, knight takes b3 check. And Tal recaptures with the rook, and finally e4 by Nikolai, attacking the pawn on f3. So that's why Tal accepts and he captures on e4. Rook takes e4, and now Tal advances his a pawn with a5. He simply wants to promote, so to stop this, rook to e7. And basically he wants to swing the rook to b7 so that he can stop that dangerous b pawn. Okay, so now here Tal goes for rook to b4. He attacks the f4 pawn, and it basically stops the g pawn from pushing further due to the attack on this pawn. So king to e8. Maybe he wants to place his king on the b7 square so that he can stop the Tal pawns. And now Tal brings his king further on d3. And guys, since this is a game by Mikhail Tal, obviously things are going to get interesting. I mean, in this position, you might be shocked to know that there is only one move that can save the game for black. And believe me, this is not easy to find. The question is, what is the move that saves the game? Just pause the video and try to find it by yourself. And guys, the move is g4. And I know most of you be like, bro, what kind of move is that? I mean, white can just grab on f4. And guys, in the next move, as you can see, rook takes g4 is coming. And guys, yes, that's true, but before that, black is going to capture the pawn on b6. And if rook takes g4, then guys, despite being a pawn up, this game is now completely equal. But how? Let's see. Here, first of all, black is going to play rook to b3 check, king to e4, king to e7, king to f5, rook king to f7, g3, rook to b5 check, king to f4, king to f6, king to f3, rook to b3 check, king to g2, rook to b1. And guys, just take a look at this position. If king to h3, then black is going to give a check from h1 square. So that's why, let's suppose if white gives a check, king to g5, king to h3, then king to rook to h1 check, king to g2, rook to b1, rook to h4, rook to b2 check, king to f3. And the main reason for this position is a draw, that black rook will keep giving continuous check to the white king, and we can mainly say that white king itself become an obstacle for its own pawn, because of which the pawn cannot advance further, and therefore the game remains equal. Okay, so in the game after king to d3, okay, so let me go back to the move. Yes, so basically after this move, here Nikolai missed that move and he goes for king to d8, which is a mistake because now Tal instantly punishes him with king to e4. The king enters the position attacking f4 and eyeing the g5. King to c8, but rook to b5, directly attacking the g5 pawn. Here black gives a check, but rook to e5. Here Tal offers a rook trade, which obviously black can't accept, because then white king will just gobble up the kingside pawns, and then he is going to promote his g pawn without any obstacle. So that's why Nikolai just defends the g5 pawn. Okay, so now black gives a check from f4 square, and guys, here note one thing, that white king cannot go for the g5 pawn, because this pawn on f3 is actually more important than black's pawn, because if white exchanges the pawn, then you can see that black rook gets free, and it is then going to capture the white pawn on b6. And Tal knows this very well, so that's why he brings his king back to g3, maintaining the pressure on the rook. Rook to f8, which is just a waiting move, and guys, now to win this game, white can consider the move rook takes g5. The idea is after king takes b6, now rook to d5, cutting off the king, and if rook to g8 check, king to h4, king to c6, rook to d3, rook to h8 check, king to g3, rook to g8 check, king to f2. And guys, now this game is completely winning for white due to two reasons. The first one is that white rook on d file completely cuts off the black king from the game, and the second one is, as you can see, black rook is not giving any check to the white king. So due to these reasons, you can see white can push his pawn easily, and this position will be completely winning for white. But after rook to f8, okay, so let me go back. Here Tal blunders with rook to b4. He leaves the defense of this fifth rank, which is very crucial for white pieces. I mean, now Nikolai instantly brings his rook to f5, and basically now he takes control over the fifth file, and now Tal tries to attack the king with the rook with the king to g4, but Okay, so now Tal goes for rook to h5. He attacks the pawn on g5, so king to c6, and finally rook takes g5. And as all you can see, obviously black cannot exchange the rook, because then this will be completely winning for white due to the better positioning of the king, through which this f pawn can easily promote. So that's why here the best move for black is to give a check from c4 square, but instead he goes for rook to c3, giving Tal a chance, and in this position he finds the best move, rook to e5, cutting off the king from the center so that he can push this f pawn without any obstacle. Okay, so king to f6, and Nikolai tries to attack the rook, but rook to e8, king to d7, rook to e1, rook to c8, but Tal advances the f pawn, rook to g8 check, king to h5, rook to f8. And guys, in this position, the final move by Tal is king to g5, and here Nikolai resigned. But why? And guys, the main reason behind black resignation is, okay, so first of all, let's understand why this position is losing for black. So for that, as I already told you, so basically for that you have to know one thing. To draw the game, black has to give multiple checks to the white king, which basically stops the pawn from pushing further, and in that case the game will get draw. But in this case, let's suppose if black tries to give multiple checks like rook to g8 check, king to h6, rook to f8, rook to e4, rook to h8 check, and you can see whenever black is giving check, then white king is getting closer to the rook. So, and now you can see there is no way for black to continue the check, so that's why rook to h8, but f5. If rook to h7 check, king to g8, attacking the rook again, and if rook to h3, f6. And obviously if he gives a check, then white king will come closer to the black rook, which I mentioned earlier. So rook to f3, f7, and you can see white rook on e4 is doing its job very well, cutting off the king. And now since this f pawn is close to promotion, so that's why now black is forced to capture on f7 with rook takes f7, and finally king takes f7. And yeah, that's all. What an absolutely brilliant endgame by Mikhail Tal. Like this video and I will see you in the next one. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.